listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas. I'm Fatima, CEO at Agile Management Office, Mental Health Ambassador, and your host. This podcast, as always, is sponsored by Agile Management Office, providing high impact delivery execution in an agile era for scaling businesses. In today's episode, I'm going to be talking to you about some of the valuable lessons that I've learned in the last 5 years of business, particularly as it is our 5-year anniversary this month. And I thought that I would go through and have a think about some of the things that I wish I had known when I started the business 5 years ago. So let me give you a little bit of background. I originally dipped my toe in the concept of business when I started my first company in 2012. Although before that, earlier on in my life and in my childhood, I always thought that I was some sort of entrepreneur. I remember as a really young child, I had spent a lot of time creating situations where adults would have to pay me money in order for me to exchange some type of product or service. Whether it was when I was in my early childhood days, and none the wiser, I remember taking Mary Kay makeup products from my mum's collection at the time, being a consultant in that space, and actually selling it to the parents of the kids at school for 50 cents or $1. I also remember working in the school canteen, both in primary school and high school. That experience of exchanging money for a service or a product was something that I really did enjoy. My earliest recollection of entrepreneurship and business would have to be when I was 7 years old. And I remember setting up a garden-style cafe with my siblings, as I'm one of 6 children, and actually pretend selling different types of cafe products using mud, sticks, rocks, plants, seeds, bugs, anything I could find. And I remember that whole concept of having something to sell and then exchanging it for, money, or bartering with my siblings for lollies or whatever it might be, was actually a really interesting experience. It's something that stayed with me all the way through high school and then all the way through my adult life. So in 2012, I set up my first business, but to be honest, when I did that, I really had no idea what I'm doing. These days, even after all these years in business, sometimes I wake up and wonder what the hell I'm doing and how I've gotten to where I have. I, like many people who probably have experienced this feeling, sometimes suffer from a little bit of imposter syndrome and feel like I'm making things up or potentially not where I am because of the hard work that I put in, but rather by some mysterious imposter that I'm playing, which is really unusual, but it's something that has popped into my mind many times over the years. So today, as part of our 5-year anniversary of Agile Management Office, which I've been running since 2016, when I took the leap of faith from a successful corporate career into my own business, I thought that as part of that journey, I wanted to share not only some of the lessons that I think would be valuable for anyone listening who either is in a business or is intending on running a business or been thinking about it, but it's also some valuable lessons, even if you are a manager or a team leader of any sort. And the reason why I wanted to share these particular lessons is because they are things that I learned the hard way, and they're things that I genuinely believe if I had known of them when I was starting out in business, I would have probably progressed into the path that I was wanting to take a lot sooner, and probably with less heartache along the way. So this episode is really to talk through 5 lessons to coincide with the 5-year anniversary of AMO. And then I'm going to tell you about those particular challenges experienced and why they were so challenging, and how those particular lessons would have been super helpful had I known them early on in my business life. And then how I've actually taken those 5 lessons and transitioned those into new behaviors and new actions that I take now to effectively help myself in business these days. So let's get into number 1. So one of the first ones, and these are not in any particular order, but one of the first ones that, may sound counterintuitive, particularly when you're a new business or you're a small business, as I am today and have been for the last 5 years. But it's all about the way in which you control your business. See, for a really long time, I spent a lot of time trying to centralize the control and command of everything going on in the business. Now, when you are a small business and you're starting out, it can be really daunting, and it can be really just a one-person business. But depending on the business that you run or thinking about running, you might actually have staff very, very early on. I recall that from starting the business in 2016, my first staff member was pretty much onboarded, I would say, within the first 7 months or 8 months of the business. And so what ends up happening is you end up having staff and more staff and more staff, and depending on the size you are, it gets to a point where you actually feel like you need to control everything that is going on with all the staff and also control everything going on in the business. Now, I know as a founder and as a CEO that you do have to have some level of oversight. But what I didn't realize at the time is it needs to be based on a helicopter view of what is going on, and not trying to control every aspect. For example, you don't need to be across every little formatting activity. You don't need to read every single social media post. You don't need to control how often your team meet each other. They can meet as they feel is necessary in order for them to get their jobs done. Some are more creative and want to meet more often. Others like to have independent time to work. The problem for me is that centralized control early on in the business, and continued for quite a while, I'll be honest, where I felt the need that in order for me to make sure that we stayed above water and maintained what we were trying to maintain in growing the business, that I need to be across everything. Now, you can't be across absolutely everything. I think about these days as I read more and more about all these really successful, inspirational CEOs and founders, and learn about some of their journeys through their biographies and autobiographies and other articles and interviews they give. Now, when you think about some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world, they can't possibly be across everything at the same time. It's just not possible. And for me, I didn't know that. I didn't know that at the time. It wasn't something that came naturally. I just always assumed that in order to be successful and to actually be able to grow your business and maintain, a perception of the perception of everything being under control, that you had to actually control and centralize that control. So what I know now that I didn't know, and I wish I had known at the time, is that having a decentralized model is actually not a bad thing. But you must have clear processes. You must have guardrails in place for what can and can't happen. You need to have general guidelines for your staff in order for them to know what is possible and what are the things that maybe needs your attention, your guidance, and potentially approval. There's got to be a balance between what you are controlling and what you can let go of. And one of the ways to do that was by breaking up all of the things that you need to do in your business or that you think you need to do. And I like to break it up into 4 quadrants and focusing those quadrants on, number 1, everything that I as a CEO and a founder must be across. And that is actually something that I'm also going to be accountable and have the roles and responsibilities for. And in addition to that, then I have a quadrant number 2. And in number 2, this is where all my senior staff, this doesn't just mean senior in terms of years experience or how long they've worked in the business, but they're people that I would consider my 2 ICs, people that are senior enough in the business, they understand the way we work, they've proven themselves in how they perform, and they understand our business really well. Those people's tasks and responsibilities would typically fit into quadrant number 2. And then quadrant number 3 would be your mid-level staff. So these are staff that are not yet team leader level or senior consultant level, but staff that are, part of a close-knit team, though they do need a little bit more direction and oversight, but often they can undertake a number of tasks independently. This might be your social media manager, or it might potentially be your bookkeeper. And then quadrant number 4 is completely relevant to those relationships or staff that you may bring in from time to time, such as copywriting help. They're not part of your core team, but you bring them in as needed. They're the skills and resources for things that you need to do in your business that you can completely outsource at the click of a finger, and they don't need to have much knowledge or IP of your business. So breaking it up into those 4 quadrants, it can really help you to give direction to your team, but also to give you a little bit of flexibility in terms of what it is you're trying to control and what areas of your business that you're able to let go of. So let's move on to number 2. The second one is around efficient and effective contracts in place for all staff members. Now, if you're like me, you might have experienced having family members or friends or colleagues, people that you may be really close with that want to support your business. And I have to say, I'm super grateful because I've had a tremendous amount of support, guidance, advice over the years from people that I absolutely respect and love. Though I will say that I wish I'd known at the start of setting up a business that no matter how amazing your relationship is with those people, that you need to have solid, up-to-date contracts in place with them. Now, this is contract in terms of how you will work together, what sort of compensation they would get, details around work responsibilities and KPIs, so key performance indicators, having all of that information documented and having that information clearly documented upfront is one of the most valuable things you can spend money on. Now, you tend to get a lawyer to help you write that. There is definitely some government support out there that provides you access to human resource professionals that can help you write those contracts. But early on in my business, I really didn't think that much of it and assumed that having a business that wasn't really worth anything when you started, it meant that you probably didn't really need those. And that was definitely a mistake. It's something that I wish I put more emphasis on early on, to just prevent some of the challenges that I've had in the last few years around that. And also it's to protect key relationships. You don't want to jeopardize relationships with friends or family because you don't have an agreement in place up front. Now, just like in a marriage where some people decide to do prenuptial agreement, your agreement with your colleagues, your friends, family, whoever it is that you've got supporting you in your business needs to happen because it protects both of you. It's not just about the business, but it's also about protecting that relationship and having absolute clarity. So I wish I'd known that early on because I probably would have spent more time upfront rather than trying to retrospectively put those in place. Number 3 is clarity and the approach to clearly define your business goals and objectives and the strategic planning around that. Now, growing up and spending most of my career in and around project management, a lot of the time the goals and objectives of projects are relatively straightforward, and they're defined in a project management plan. And typically as a project, you may get some visibility of how the goals and objectives of the project link into an organization's strategic goals and objectives, but seldom do you get involved in determining those goals and objectives and those metrics and those strategy and the vision and mission of that particular agenda for the year or for the 5 years of that business. Something I didn't know at the start was that I needed to have clarity around what the vision and mission was for the business before starting it out. And I unfortunately didn't have enough knowledge in this space. I didn't really understand how organizational strategic objectives link into goals, that link into metrics, and then you basically define those and review them regularly and have clarity on what you're trying to do. Now, it's not just the process, but it's in fact the clarity on what I wanted to do. The reason for that and not having that clarity wasn't just because there wasn't a process in the business to define it clearly, because that's something that you can find an abundance of information online. But for me, I didn't take the time to actually go out and speak to potential customers about what they wanted and how I potentially could help them. I just assumed that because I was able to do some really valuable work within the corporate space that I was in and was getting really good feedback and asked to recreate those wins in other parts of the businesses that I was working in, that if I went external and created a consultancy, that those exact same requests would come through. Now, they did start to trickle in, but it was slow at the beginning. It wasn't like I knew exactly what customers wanted because I didn't take the time to research and ask them whether or not this would be something they want. So my recommendation on having a lack of clarity and vision is, first of all, talk to your prospective customers. These are people that you would like to see buying your product or service. And I'm talking about the right demographic or the industry or the type of business. It doesn't have to be the actual people who are going to buy. You're not trying to sell them anything. You just want to sell the idea and the concept of your business. And then using that feedback and that information, refine down your goals and your objectives for what you want to achieve. And it can be really daunting and overwhelming to plan out goals and objectives years in advance. And I know some people talk about 5-year plans, 10-year plans, etc. But these days things are moving so fast and so volatile that just planning 30, 60, 90 days. 90 days was what I was doing very early on. 90 days is a really good starting point. If you just do that at the very minimum, it'll help you get closer to whatever it is that your greater vision is all about. Number 4 is sales processes. So sales is probably the most challenging part, I would probably say, out of all the departments and streams of work within our business. It's the most challenging because you often get more no's than you get yeses, and it can be really disheartening and it can be really overwhelming to get no's instead of yeses, particularly when you invest a lot of time with a prospective customer or when you spend a long time creating tender documents or submitting quotes only to be told that they've gone with an alternative. That happens. It happens, I think, in every single business. We're not unique. Your business won't be any different to that. But now, 5 years on, I have so much more clarity and knowledge on what I need to know when it comes to sales, not only through reading books and researching and undertaking brief sales courses, but having a sales mentor and also just learning from my mistakes. So having a clearly defined sales process, which you may not be able to do on your own immediately, but even taking the time to educate yourself on the sales processes that are relevant for your industry. If you're in consulting or if you're selling a product, whatever the case may be, taking the time to think about that and defining that. So a sales process is everything from how do you generate leads, which is where marketing comes into it, but how do you generate leads, which are prospective opportunities or prospective customers, all the way through taking that customer from effectively a suspect to someone that knows nothing about your product, all the way through to a converted lead, which in fact then becomes an actual customer of yours. So the process and the actual steps that you take from start to finish, what happens along every step of that journey, from the conversations you have with the customers, from the templates that you use, from the quoting mechanisms, all of the things that you need to do across that sales journey. Now, usually to really start off and think about that, put yourself in the shoes of your potential customer and map out what happens from the beginning of finding out about your product or service all the way through to when you deliver it for your customer and the support afterwards. Now, it can be really daunting. It is very challenging. There is so much to know about sales, and I feel like it's an art and a science. There's quite a lot to get your head around. So if you can get some support in that space, or even hire a business development manager, or if you're very, very much like me, bootstrapped the whole way through, then look at doing some online courses and reading. There's a lot of courses on programs like Udemy, and there's also a lot of small business, state government and federal government support that's out there that you can look into. So I wish I'd known a lot more about sales than I did. And I wish I knew as much as I know now, because I probably would have won a lot more opportunities as opposed to lost them, and also leveraged the learnings from those sooner. So that is number 4. And then number 5, and again, this is not an exhaustive list, but number 5 is one of the things that I did very early on in business, was spend a lot of time and waste a lot of time and waste a lot of money subscribing to program after program after program to automate my business before even documenting clearly the processes within it. So what I mean here is, it can be really overwhelming trying to manage all the different information streams that are coming at you from HR, work cover, insurances, sales, finance, product development, legals. Everything you need to do is a lot of information. So one of the things that a lot of people do, and I did do this at the beginning, was I started seeking out software after software after software to automate, not only automate, but actually manage processes that I had in the business. Oh, I need a software to manage my HR when I had 3 people. I needed a software to manage my sales pipeline when I was originally a 1-person band. I needed software to track my documents. I needed software to communicate this. I needed software for marketing. I needed project management software. I needed all of these software, but I didn't. So the lesson here is, don't try to automate processes that you don't have clearly defined to begin with. You need to understand your processes, and you need to consider whether or not it's even worth using technology for those processes or those functions so early on in your business. Technology is great, but used inefficiently, or set up and paid for and not used, or introduced and then trying to get it set up, can take away a lot of energy and time and money from your business. So don't do what I did and just start subscribing to a number of even free trials for every product under the sun, and start to think about rather what processes you need. Break them up by functions within your business. So HR, finance, sales, marketing. In each of those functions, you may only have a handful of processes to begin with, but put them into an operational manual. And then you can start thinking about, how do I take all of these processes, and in fact, which ones are the ones that I do spend the most time on, and how much time does it take? If you find that there's something that you spend hours a week doing, and you are doing it through Excel spreadsheets, which, mind you, in starting up a business can be fantastic and last you a really long time. But if you find that you're doing something that takes you 8 hours a week, that a piece of software like a customer relationship management tool or maybe a marketing tool will take you 30 minutes, well, then that's a no-brainer. But don't try to automate everything before you have clear processes. They don't have to be detailed processes to start with. Just start with a very high level and you can continue to add to that. One of the tips I have is I have my own sort of go-to guide for everything that I do personally. And they are business related and also my personal projects. And I just have a document open that I continuously add to every time I think of something that I want to come back to later, or a tool or a reference, anything at all. I just document it, and then I know that I can always revert back to it as needed and not need to worry about it at that point in time. So there you have it, guys. That is my 5 lessons, business lessons, that I wish that I had known much earlier in business, because I would have saved a lot of challenges, a lot of heartache, and probably a lot of tears as well, if I'm honest. Then if I had known them, I probably would have been in a much better position. There is a lot more to learn in business, and it can be very overwhelming and daunting. But if you're passionate about what you're doing and you know where you're trying to go, and you believe in your heart and you believe in your business and others are believing you too, then it does make that journey just that little bit easier. So there's a lot of things that you need to learn in business, but taking your time to learn through those, reading books, marking them up, and then trying to implement the things that you're reading in those books where relevant. And also another thing to consider, depending on how much time you have, I like to focus on one process a month or to improve. So for example, this month we're focusing on a continuous improvement for our sales processes. Whereas last month it was continuous improvement for our marketing processes. And if every month you continuously improve processes within your business, you'll find that you'll be far better off for it. So there you have it, my 5 business lessons that I wish I knew when I started. I hope that you have enjoyed this episode. We have some really interesting episodes coming up with some guest speakers talking about next one. We'll be talking all about implementation of Agile in an organization and how they have gone about it, and we'll be deep diving into some questions around their transformation challenges on that journey and what that looks like working within a large government organization in the UK. So stay tuned for that one. I hope you have enjoyed today's episode, and I'm so glad to be here with you. Have a wonderful week ahead.
Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and to stay up to date with all things Agile Ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?